The perfect illusion. What happens when a man forgets the woman he married is the same woman who signs his checks. Tonight we delve into the story of Julian Croft and Clara Vance, a couple who defined New York's high society. He was the charismatic face of their empire's luxury division. She was the quiet, calculating billionaire who built it. At a glittering Manhattan gala surrounded by the city's elite, Julian made a fatal mistake. In a moment of supreme arrogance, he openly mocked his wife to impress his young mistress. He thought it was a joke. He didn't realize it was a declaration of war. What followed wasn't a tearful fight. It was a silent corporate execution that dismantled his life piece by piece. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was always precisely 72 degrees. Climate-controlled perfection that mirrored the lives of its inhabitants. Clara Vance, CEO and founder of Vance Global, lived for precision. It was evident in the crisp lines of her Tom Ford pantsuit, the quiet hum of the integrated smart home system, and the rigorously organized schedule that dictated her every waking hour. Vance Global wasn't just a company, it was a modern empire of luxury real estate. 5-star hotels and exclusive lifestyle brands, all forged by Clara's sharp intellect and almost prophetic understanding of market trends. She was the architect, the engine, and the final authority. Her husband, Julian Croft, was the showroom model. Where Clara was reserved and analytical, Julian was effervescent charm with a dazzling smile that could disarm a hostile board member and a lineage that dripped old money prestige. He was the perfect public face. He ran the Croft Connoisseur Collection, a highly successful division of Vance Global that managed their most elite boutique hotels. It was his name on the glossy brochures, his face in the society pages, and his voice that wooed investors at cocktail parties. Most people, even some within the company, assumed he was a co-equal partner, the charismatic yin to Clara's strategic yang. It was a carefully curated illusion, and lately, the cracks were beginning to show, visible only to the woman who had designed the facade in the first place. The trouble began subtly, as it always does. It started with Julian's increasing dismissiveness in private. He'd come home late from investor dinners, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. Ambroxan, a trendy, youthful scent, worlds away from Clara's classic Chanel No. 5. When she questioned him, he'd laugh it off. "Ellie, darling, you can't be suspicious of every pretty young thing who wants to pitch me a hotel spa concept," he'd say, loosening his tie. "It's the business of charm. You handle the numbers, I handle the people. It's our magic formula." He called her Ellie, a diminutive she'd always hated, a name that felt like a pat on the head. Then came the financial discrepancies. Small at first, a few thousand on a corporate card for client entertainment at restaurants they didn't have contracts with. A weekend trip to St. Bart's classified as on-site location scouting for a hotel that didn't exist. Clara, who could spot a rounding error in a 300-page financial report from 10 feet away, saw it all. She logged each transaction in a private encrypted file on her personal server. She didn't confront him. Confrontation was messy, emotional. Clara preferred data. She was collecting it. The mistress's name was Sienna Lauren. Clara knew this not from a private investigator, but from her own company's marketing reports. Sienna was a social media influencer, one of thousands with a glossy curated life and an appetite for luxury. Julian had recently hired her on a lucrative contract as a brand ambassador for the Croft Connoisseur Collection. Her Instagram feed, once a predictable stream of avocado toast and sponsored activewear, was now a showcase for Vance Global properties. Sienna in a bathrobe on the balcony of their Lake Como hotel. Sienna sipping champagne at their rooftop bar in Dubai. Sienna posing coyly by the fireplace in the presidential suite of their Aspen resort, a suite Julian had claimed he needed for a last-minute solo work retreat. In every photo, Sienna wore a delicate gold necklace with a single stylized J. Clara watched this digital pantomime with chillingly calm detachment. It was, in its own way, another data point. Julian wasn't just having an affair. He was flaunting it, using company resources to fund and promote it. It was an act of profound disrespect, not just to their marriage, but to the empire she had painstakingly built from the ground up. Her father, a steel magnate from Pittsburgh, had taught her two things: never let emotion cloud a business judgment, and never tolerate a liability. Julian, blinded by his own arrogance and the intoxicating adoration of his young mistress, had forgotten that in Clara's world, everything and everyone was ultimately an asset or a liability. The final piece of data she needed arrived in the form of an engraved invitation. The annual Starlight Gala for the Children's Health Foundation, the absolute pinnacle of the New York charity season. It was an event Clara chaired. Her name was at the very top of the letterhead. It was her foundation, her cause, her night. "Darling," Julian said, strolling into her home office, holding up two tuxedo options, classic peak lapel or the more modern shawl collar for the gala. Clara looked up from her screen, her eyes cool and unreadable. "The foundation is honoring us with the Vanguard Award this year, Julian, for our contributions." "I know. Fantastic. Isn't it?" He beamed, utterly oblivious to the irony. "We need to look the part of a power couple. I was thinking we could even make a little speech together. You can handle the serious thank yous, and I'll close with a bit of charm. Get them to open their wallets." Clara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "Our contributions." He had already begun to speak of her life's work in the plural. He saw himself not as a custodian of a small part of her empire, but as its co-creator. "I think it's best if I handle the speech," she said, her voice even. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Don't be so rigid, Ellie. We're a team. Besides," he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I have a special guest I want to introduce you to. A real firecracker. The girl I was telling you about, Sienna Lauren. She's doing wonders for the brand. I gave her a ticket. To the gala. It's time she met the queen of the castle." He winked, as if they were sharing a clever secret. And in that moment, Clara's data collection was complete. The final damning entry was logged. Julian wasn't just going to bring his mistress to her event. He was going to formally introduce them, forcing Clara to play the role of the gracious, unsuspecting wife. It was a power play of breathtaking audacity. He was testing her, pushing the boundaries to see how much she would tolerate. He was about to get his answer. "Of course," Clara said, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I look forward to meeting her." She turned back to her computer, her expression placid. Julian, satisfied, went to his wardrobe to choose his suit. He was whistling. On her screen, Clara closed the spreadsheet of Julian's expenses. She opened a new file, this one protected by a biometric scan and a 32-character password. Its title was simple: Project Severance. She began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard with silent, deadly precision. The first line on the document was, a name, Marcus Thorne, head of her personal legal team at Sullivan & Cromwell. The second was a directive. Prepare full execution of clauses 11B and 17C of the prenuptial and corporate governance agreements. Urgent. The storm was gathering, but the sky for now remained deceptively clear. The gala was in 1 week. Julian thought he was preparing for a party. Clara was preparing for a corporate decapitation. The Starlight Gala was held at the Temple of Dender in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a location so exclusive it was reserved for deities, ancient and modern. The cavernous space, with its soaring glass wall overlooking a darkened Central Park, was filled with the soft murmur of New York's 1%. Billionaires mingled with politicians, artists with tech moguls. The air was thick with the scent of money, power, and expensive perfume. Clara Vance moved through the crowd like a shark in her own aquarium, silent, elegant, and utterly in command. She wore a custom-made Schiaparelli gown in deep sapphire blue that shimmered under the dramatic lighting. It was a dress that didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, cold and hard as her resolve. She greeted senators and philanthropists with a warm, measured smile, her eyes betraying none of the glacial fury that churned within her. Julian was in his element, a golden retriever let loose in a field of well-wishers. He wore the shawl-collar tuxedo, looking every bit the debonair tycoon. He trailed in Clara's wake, shaking hands, clapping backs, and laughing a booming laugh. That echoed slightly in the vast hall. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne, one of which he periodically tried to hand to Clara, who gracefully declined every time. "Darling, you must be parched," he'd insist. "I'm fine, Julian. I have work to do," she'd reply before turning to discuss endowment strategies with the museum's director. The special guest arrived fashionably late. Sienna Lauren made an entrance, designed to be noticed. She wore a crimson dress that was cut daringly low in the front and slit perilously high on the leg. It was a beautiful gown, but at this particular event, among the tasteful couture of the city's grandes dames, it screamed nouveau riche, or worse, mistress. She scanned the room with wide, hungry eyes until she spotted Julian. A brilliant, predatory smile spread across her face. Julian, seeing her, practically lit up. He excused himself from a conversation with a federal judge and strode toward her, his relief palpable. He had been a moon orbiting Clara's planet all evening. Now his son had arrived. Clara watched the entire exchange reflected in the great glass wall. She saw Julian take Sienna's hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. She saw him lean in and whisper something in her ear that made Sienna giggle, a sound like tiny, sharp bells. She watched as he led her not to a quiet corner, but directly toward the most influential group of people in the room, the one where Clara was standing. The group included Harrison Montgomery, the elderly but razor-sharp chairman of the board of Vance Global, and several key investors whose families had been intertwined with Clara's for generations. This was her inner circle, her fortress, and Julian was about to lead the Trojan horse right through the main gate. "Ah, there you are, darling," Julian boomed, arriving at her side. "Everyone, I want you to meet the brilliant new face of the Croft Connoisseur Collection, Miss Sienna Lauren. Sienna, this is everyone." He made a vague, sweeping gesture, but his eyes were fixed on his wife. "And this, of course, is my better half, Clara." Sienna extended a perfectly manicured hand. "It is an absolute honor to meet you, Mrs. Vance Croft," she purred, her voice dripping with rehearsed sincerity. She deliberately used the hyphenated name that Clara had legally dropped years ago, but which Julian insisted on using on social occasions. It was a small, yet pointed power play. Clara's eyes met Sienna's. There was a flicker of youthful defiance. In the younger woman's gaze, a challenge. Clara took her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin cool. "Miss Lauren," Clara said, her voice a low, melodic calm that drew the attention of the entire group. "Julian has told me nothing about you, but your work with the brand speaks for itself. Your Instagram engagement is up 7.3% this quarter. Commendable." The data-driven compliment was so unexpected, so devoid of emotion, that it momentarily threw Sienna off balance. She had expected jealousy, a cold shoulder, perhaps a thinly veiled insult. She had not expected a performance review. Julian, however, misinterpreted Clara's corporate chilliness as social awkwardness. He decided, in his infinite vanity, that she needed his help to navigate the situation. He put a familiar, possessive arm around Sienna's waist and pulled her closer. "See, I told you she was a firecracker," he said to the group, but he was looking at Clara. She has this incredible intuitive grasp of what people want. She's not stuck in the old ways of doing things. It's all about being fresh, dynamic now. Harrison Montgomery shifted his weight, his old eyes narrowing slightly. He had known Clara since she was a girl. He knew her old ways had turned a $10 million inheritance into a $10 billion empire. Julian, emboldened by the champagne and the proximity of his mistress, pressed on. This was his moment to assert himself, to show these old fossils that he was the future. "Clara, bless her," he said, patting his wife's arm in a gesture that was meant to look affectionate, but came across as deeply patronizing. "She's the queen of the balance sheet, a genius with numbers. But when it comes to the feel of a place, the soul, well, that's where new blood is essential. Sometimes you get so bogged down in spreadsheets you forget that luxury is supposed to be fun." A hush fell over the small group. He wasn't just praising his mistress. He was actively belittling his wife, the CEO of his company, in front of her own chairman and investors. He was framing her as a passionless accountant, a relic, while positioning himself and Sienna as the vibrant visionaries. It was an act of breathtaking professional and personal betrayal. Sienna, seeing her opening, preened under Julian's arm. "Julian is such a visionary," she added, her eyes gleaming. "He wants to make luxury feel alive, not like you're walking through a museum." She glanced around the Temple of Dender, a subtle but unmistakable dig at the very event Clara was hosting. The air grew thick with unspoken horror. The investors stared at their shoes. Harrison Montgomery looked as though he'd just swallowed acid. Clara did not flinch. She did not blush or cry or raise her voice. She remained perfectly still, her sapphire gown absorbing the light, her expression one of serene curiosity. She let the silence stretch, letting Julian's words hang in, the air like poison gas, suffocating him. Finally, she turned her head slowly, her diamond earrings catching the light, and fixed her gaze on her husband. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of clinical assessment, as if she were examining a faulty piece of equipment for the last time before decommissioning it. "That's a fascinating perspective, Julian," she said, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. "To be so concerned with the soul of a business. It's an intangible asset, difficult to quantify." She paused, then gave him a small, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Thank you for sharing it." Without another word, she turned to Harrison Montgomery. "Harrison, I believe it's time for the award presentation. Would you be so kind as to escort me to the stage?" As she walked away, Harrison at her side, the spell was broken. The investors mumbled excuses and dispersed, leaving Julian and Sienna standing alone in a suddenly vast, empty space. The warmth and adoration they had, felt a moment before, had vanished, replaced by a chilling Arctic breeze. Julian watched his wife ascend the stage, a regal figure in blue. He had a sinking feeling, a sudden sharp anxiety that the champagne couldn't numb. He had meant to assert his power, to put Clara in her place. But as he watched her take the podium, looking out over the most powerful people in New York, as if she owned every single one of them, he had the terrifying realization that he had not just poked the bear. He had mocked the dragon in her own lair, and he had done it in front of her entire court. Sienna squeezed his hand. "We really showed them, didn't we?" she whispered, oblivious. Julian didn't answer. He just watched Clara, who began her speech, without even a glance in his direction. The week ahead, he suddenly suspected, was going to be very, very long. What Julian didn't know was that while he was celebrating his perceived victory, Clara was already 3 moves ahead in a chess game. He didn't even realize he was playing. By Monday morning, his world would begin to crumble, not with explosive drama, but with the cold, calculated precision of a master strategist who had finally decided to stop playing defense. The dragon had been awakened, and Julian Croft was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Never underestimate the woman who built the empire you call home.